none was collected with her other work. I surmise that there were a variety of reasons. She had just published one collection of short stories. It was already 17 stories long, no room for another 3. Those sort of got forgotten. When she was collecting that first group called Curtain of Green, A Curtain of Green, and Other Stories, she often had to retype the stories because she just either had the one magazine edition or she didn't even have that anymore. And so she was retyping. And every time she retyped, she tells us later, and we can see how it happened, she improved on the story. She couldn't just retype. She would change things, and typically change them for the better. Later on, another set of stories, when she retyped them for the press or for publication, they got longer instead of shorter. When they had asked for cuts, she made those cuts, and then she added a few other things that make the story that we read today. So lots of reasons not that these stories didn't get included in her 4 collections. However, neither did they get included in the collected stories in 1982, maybe, something. Those stories collected A Curtain of Green and Other Stories, The Wide Net and Other Stories, The Golden Apples, and The Bride of the Innisfallen and Other Stories, plus the 2 stories from the 1960s that had been published in The New Yorker. So why not collect these other stories also? Really absolutely marvelous pieces. Well, one, she probably wasn't that interested in revisiting old work, if in fact she remembered. They weren't already set in type, thus making it an additional job to bring out. She was already rereading everything and changing some things that were no longer absolutely unpolitically correct. And it probably just didn't really occur to her or to John Ferron, the editor at the press, to include those other stories. So those stories are now available, not in the defunct, unavailable, difficult to find journals or in the archives, but in occasions. So I want to read a little bit from one of those. Her very first story, written probably about 1935, is called Acrobats in the Park. And she would have seen Acrobats in the Park, or all the acts that were going downriver to New Orleans came by Jackson, the capital in Mississippi, and she writes in several pieces how she saw all of these wonderful different acts. In the 1930s, one of her jobs for just a few months was working for the Works Progress Administration as a junior publicity agent, not as a photographer. And she would help set up the county fairs, or she would do the farm to market road. So she took a lot of photographs of the sideshow posters, not the sideshows themselves, but some of the posters. And her story, Keela the Outcast Indian Maiden, came from one of those pieces. And I want to read just a little piece from this first story, not published until the 1970s, and then in a limited edition, first in a French journal, and then in a limited edition. And this is called Acrobats in a Park. And it's unbelievable to me, reading this today, after studying and reading Welty for more than 30 years, that everything that she came to do seemingly naturally and to thrill me as a reader is right here in this first story. All the themes that she identified later on, they're all in this story. So here's the beginning, and then I have another paragraph. The Zarros, Z-A-R-R-O-S, beautiful name. The Zarros, a family of acrobats, are eating their lunch in a little park in the center of town. It is a late day in October when the wind suddenly falls and the sun makes still objects warm to the touch. Kind of like a day like today, in fact. The Zarros belong to a circus which performed in Jackson the night before, but left at dawn without them. Conflict, right there. The van in which the Zarros live and travel can be seen from here if one stands tall enough, down the hill below the town, solitary. On the circus grounds near the river edge, a worn red van painted in tall letters with the name Zarro. A few pages later. Ricky's allowing his arm to break during last night's performance. Beppo's sudden coming old age. Bird's impotency, which she has so often lamented. Tina's contempt, her literal obedience to her. Poverty and the stranded days to come. And now, today, all these things are alike facts, like her own weight. perhaps after a while it will all come out all right.